Hi everyone, it's Emily, and today I want to talk about a topic that I've been contemplating quite a bit and have also touched upon many times on this channel. And that is, when is it okay to splurge on a game, or when is it best to wait? When it comes to modern day collecting, there's been an influx of different reprints, re-releases, and different publisher units of certain games that used to command very high prices on the aftermarket, mostly due to the growing popularity of video game speculation, as well as people discovering some very low print niche games. This is a topic that I've brought up a few times now on this channel, most recently with my 2023 3DS buying guide. But I wanted to expand upon this and sort of have a discussion about when is the right time to splurge on a game or to wait. So most recently, I partook in a reprint sale over at Video Games Plus, who is another retailer I mentioned many times on this channel, but they are very well known for approaching different publishers and requesting reprints of highly sought after games. So over the past year or so, I've been able to acquire a number of different games through them at retail price, including Blue Reflection here for the PS4, as well as Attack on Titan 2. So prior to this reprint, both of these games used to command well over $100 for used copies. So it's been really nice as a collector to still be able to attain many of these games that used to be so out of reach. And it's also helped me reevaluate how I want to go about collecting, especially for some of the more desirable, higher priced titles. So when it comes to reprints, I think knowing who the publisher of a game is very important. So for example, both Blue Reflection and Attack on Titan 2 are published through Koei Tecmo Games. And so they are one of the publishers who are known to release reprints. They've done this for Atelier Ryza, the first one, and I have a feeling they're going to do this for the second one sometime soon. Another publisher who's known to do reprints is Nintendo. So they did this with Xenoblade Chronicles 2 and Torna of the Golden Country most recently. NIS is another publisher who is known to do reprints, though sometimes in low quantities, unfortunately. I have a story for my next video about one of their recent reprints that didn't turn out so well for me. But through one of the reprint sales, I was able to obtain a reprinted copy of Ys 8, which in North America used to command super high prices. So knowing who a publisher is and their history of reprinting, I think is very key for the specific way to navigate buying games. Another similar factor that I usually put into consideration whether to wait or spring for an expensive game is how likely is the game going to see production elsewhere. So most recently, we've seen Celeste receive a retail version through Fangamer. And this used to be a very highly sought after limited run games exclusive title that saw physical print. So in the case of Celeste here, I think this just exemplifies that we really shouldn't give in to FOMO, especially concerning indie games that are very popular. So whenever you have a very popular title and it definitely shows on eBay that they command high prices on the aftermarket, I think this just signals that this game will more than likely have a retail release somewhere down the line. Of course, there are probably contracts that some of these limited publishers put on indie devs whenever it comes to publishing their games. I think Super Rare Games does this, where they ask for exclusive rights to publish their games. But I've noticed with a lot of limited run games, they don't always just end with them when it comes to physical releases. We've seen so many examples of this, of not only these indie titles getting published through one different limited publisher, but multiple, as well as coming to retail or Asian English releases. So I don't think it's totally out of the question to wait and see what happens for some of these games that are commanding really high prices on the aftermarket. And before I get into a few different things to consider, what's really nice about some of these re-releases is that we've seen many of these games receive updated physical versions. I have a whole nother video dedicated to this topic for Switch revised cards specifically, but Xenoblade Chronicles 2 here is one of the games that did receive a revised physical cart. So the physical game is patched over from what was initially released at launch and fixed a few bugs and whatnot. So in the case that the Nintendo Switch eShop officially closes down the line and there's no way to recover some of these patches, it's nice to have the actual patches available on revised Switch card here. Many indie releases also saw revised cards when they went to publish at retail. And I'm not totally positive about this, but I think in the case of Celeste, it might be a more updated cart than what limited run games had initially launched with. So that's just a nice perk when it comes to some of these re-releases and reprints. It's just nice to know that sitting on your shelf, you own a more complete version. So while we're still collecting for a modern system, all these possibilities of reprints, re-releases, and whatnot are still on the table. So I personally hesitate whenever it comes to these expensive modern day releases that pop up on the aftermarket. I think more often than not, a lot of collectors who do give into FOMO, worrying that the price is only gonna rise for some of the more niche games that were available on the PS4, on the Switch, or whatnot. Whenever these reprints or re-releases happen, it definitely is a downer knowing that you overpaid for a certain title. Even though you really wanted it in your collection, no one likes to overpay for games. Another reason why I don't like splurging on modern day console games is that there's a possibility we might see the same title come to a future console. So in the past, we've seen plenty of games take advantage of releasing on an older system and then being brought over to the newer system. For example, on the Nintendo DS, all of these Shin Megami Tensei games, so Devil Survivor and Devil Survivor 2, as well as Strange Journey, were all originally released on the DS, but got sort of remastered versions on the 3DS. And we've also seen a number of 3DS titles hop over to the Nintendo Switch. For example, we have that with the Alliance Live here. With the next Nintendo console just around the corner, I have a feeling we're going to see quite a bit of overlap when it comes to game libraries, whether it's going to be backwards compatible or not. So we saw this with the SMT games, 2 Devil Survivor games. The original Nintendo DS could play on a 3DS, but Atlas decided to remaster them and make new 3DS versions that are considered the definitive versions to play these games. And while the Nintendo Switch was not backwards compatible with the 3DS, a lot of the remastered versions of the 3DS games onto the Switch are considered the definitive versions as well. So there's a possibility that you might be rebuying a game if you want the definitive version down the line. But again, it's hard to know whether that's going to happen or not. But I think a lot of these decisions do not need to be as urgent as what a lot of, say, the limited print publishers try to make it out to be. I think there's been a little bit too much FOMO when it comes to collecting, and sometimes it does pay to wait. And even if some of these ports and remasters are not necessarily definitive versions from the previous releases, it's nice to buy them at retail rather than inflated prices. For example, we've been seeing Shantae and the Pirate's Curse, which demands a super high price both on the 3DS, the Switch, and also a little bit on the PS4. That recently received a PS5 version. So whatever new console Nintendo decides to release, I have a feeling that we'll be seeing a new Shantae and the Pirate's Curse brought over to that system as well. So I've just talked about a lot of reasons why it may pay to wait for certain releases before buying them. Now I'm going to switch gears and focus more on why it might be a good idea to buy certain games now rather than later. I guess the obvious one is if you really want a game for a certain console, you might have to pay a little bit more, but it might be worth it to you. Like with the Shantae series, you may just want all the games uniform on the same console, and if you really love the Nintendo Switch, it might be worth paying that extremely high price for that game to complete your collection. Now, there's definitely no hard and fast rule on what you should and shouldn't splurge on. It's going to vary from person to person. But I'm going to share a few things that I take into consideration when it comes to making my curated collection. On what sort of games would I allow myself to splurge on? So this is definitely going to bleed into some of my recent 3DS videos on what 3DS game I recently splurged on. And so what I decided to splurge on was Professor Layton versus Phoenix Wright. And there's a few different reasons why I decided to splurge and spend over $100 on this game. It wasn't as high as I've seen it, but $100 for a 3DS game is still a lot in my book. I guess the biggest reason why I decided to splurge on this game is because I've been getting more into the Phoenix Wright and Professor Layton games. So I really didn't want to miss out, and I regret not picking this title up when it's still at a certain price range. 3DS games are no longer being reprinted. Sometimes stores like Video Games Plus might get a shipment in from the publisher that are leftover copies. Video Games Plus in particular, I think, has a relationship with some of these publishers like Xseed and Atlas, where they've been able to get their hands on some very desirable titles that were reprinted at one point, and they still have a few leftover copies available for sale. However, outside of that, 3DS games are definitely becoming more scarce, especially the non-Nintendo published games. So I definitely felt some pressure with the looming 3DS eShop closure that's coming in March, as well as just knowing that this game didn't receive a huge distribution. It's a very niche title, a collaboration of two major franchises, but out here in the West, it's considered very niche still. And I guess my third reason why I decided to splurge on this particular game is because I don't think it's going to get a re-release on a different console at some point. A lot of collaboration games from different companies have all of these different copyright and other things they have to navigate in order to put a game out there. That's why we've been seeing quite a few games being pulled from the eShop early, like the Project Cross Zone games. So in order to see these collaboration games get re-released in the future on different consoles, there's going to be a lot of different kind of people who need to come together and decide upon it. And with this not being a super popular release out here in the West, I really don't see them all coming together and agreeing upon re-releasing this game. And while Capcom definitely has the resources to release games on new consoles, I'm less certain about Level 5, especially in the localization market here. Level 5 did recently announce that they're going to give the Western localization another try after closing their offices a few years ago. But I feel like Level 5 is still kind of on the fringe of bankruptcy or being acquired by another group altogether. So with all that in mind, there's a possibility that they might never come back in the West, or at least not in the same form they used to be. So them trying to re-release this title onto the new Switch or something like that, I think is very low. Now I have a little list of other games I've been thinking about splurging on. One of them is a 3DS game, Professor Layton and the Azran Legacy. And I think for the 3DS, that might be the last kind of splurge game I might try to get. I have two other games that I've been thinking about, A Train Odyssey Nexus as well as Yokai Watch 3. However, those are not as high of a priority for me as the Professor Layton game. Mostly because of my general interest in the game, as well as a few different rumors when it comes to those other titles and how they may reappear on the Switch or not. So it's really difficult to, I think, navigate all this, but really prioritizing what sort of games you want to collect, I think, should be the first thing to put into consideration, whether or not to splurge on a game or not. Outside of the 3DS, I have a few different Switch titles I've been thinking of splurging on. There are a few different NES titles that I would love to have on the Switch. They might get ports or remasters on a different console at some point, but I do kind of like the idea of owning those select few titles on the Switch. So I may or may not decide to go that route. And I definitely wouldn't pay over $100 for those at this point. Just something slightly over MSRP. And I haven't even talked about collector's editions. There's one collector's edition that I've been thinking of splurging on, and that is Xenoblade Chronicles 2. And that's just mostly to complete my collection. I'd love to have the boxes for all those with the steel books and art books and whatnot. But outside that, I'm not really looking for other collector's editions. So I'm safe from that for now. Now if we're getting into more retro sort of games, like on the earlier handhelds, there are a few games I've already somewhat splurged upon in my books, not over $100, but I think anything over like $70 for these, it's still pretty expensive for an older game. So games I've done this more recently were mostly games I don't think are going to get reported anytime soon, and I do want them on the original console they were released for. So for example, I have the Nintendo DS version of Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon that I paid around $70 for, which is high, but I guess not as high as some of the prices I've been seeing. And I really don't see a remaster of this game coming anytime soon. Not when there's a lot of other games that haven't been remastered, remade, or even localized out here in the West. I definitely don't think this takes precedence compared to those. And when it comes to the PS Vita, there are definitely games that I paid higher prices for to get on the system than if I were to say buy them on the PS4. And so that includes the ordinary games. I really like visual novels and I like to have them on handheld. So it made sense for me to pay a little bit more to get it on the Vita rather than buy it much cheaper on the PS4. And sort of in a similar vein, I don't own a PS3, but Lost Dimension here is also available on that system, though I haven't looked at prices. That might be a bit more expensive than the beta version. This was still around $70, which I think is kind of expensive for an older generation game, but I was happy to pay that to kind of beef up my beta collection. And then I guess the final example, which was another $70 purchase. You can kind of see 70 is my upper limit for some of these consoles at this time. I might have to step up a bit, especially with inflation and where prices are going nowadays, but I did get Miramasa Rebirth for that price. And I think it was today actually where I saw Vanillaware said that they would love to bring Miramasa onto modern consoles, but there are some hiccups with that. I'm glad I got this on the beta when I did. It seems like a lot of their games are not getting ported very quickly. It took forever for 13 Sentinels to get a Switch port, so some of their older titles, it might take a long time as well. But yeah, those are all sort of the different factors I take into consideration, whether or not to wait for a game or to splurge on it. Let me know if you guys also take something else into consideration, or do you have any hard and fast rules, like you won't ever pay X amount for a certain game, or how do you try to navigate this for your collection? I would love to have a discussion of kind of what everyone's different thought processes when it comes to forming their collections. But yeah, I just wanted to make this video because I find the different collecting philosophies among different people interesting, and also just as a little bit of a PSA that reprints do happen for certain games, and sometimes it does make sense to wait rather than overpay at this point in time. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and until my next one, bye guys.